Laptop computer spins onto the screen, opens, and displays ATP Education Program webinar series, closes, and then spins off the screen.
Welcome to Section 4 in our discussion of adoption versus abandonment. This section focuses on consideration and how this can be a very powerful start to nudging our students towards adopting the technologies we have found for them. Hello, I'm Sayard Bass. I'm a speech pathologist and assistive technology professional. I will be walking us through this today. So consideration, to me, is one of the most powerful parts of the assistive technology process because this is where you are actually pairing the student with their tool. So in this section, I'd first like you to be able to reference the sections of IDEA which do pertain to consideration. This is very important because sometimes you have to pull that out to teams to say we do need to put the time and effort into this. And second, then to list 3 models which can help you with consideration. So consideration sometimes is broken down into feature matching because we're looking at the needs of the student as well as the strengths of the student and then trying to find what activity is difficult and matching a tool that can help either replace, enhance, maintain those things that are more difficult. So it's something that may not sound tricky, but if somebody on the team does not have the knowledge either of the student, does not have knowledge of the tasks the student is involved in, or does not have knowledge of tools, it can be very tricky for them to perform a good consideration, which we know can set the student up for failing to adopt their assistive technology. So as I said, consideration is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There are 3 sections that are kind of most important within this regard. First, that we have to provide assistive technology to all of our students. Second, that an assistive technology device can be anything as long as it is providing that accommodation for a student. I always think of the phrase increase, improve, maintain. If it is a tool that is increasing, improving, or maintaining a student's function, then it definitely falls under these definitions. Even if it might not seem like something that technological, it could be low tech, it could be off the shelf, it could be something you jerry-rigged in your garage with a soldering iron, some PVC pipe, and some glue. But if it is helping the student to increase, improve, or maintain their function, it is considered assistive technology. And then finally, assistive technology services, which includes kind of some of that adjusting, personalizing, teaching of assistive technology. It doesn't necessarily look like a service in the sense that an OT or PT or speech person might come in and intervene to see improvement. It's more we're giving service to find a way to replace a function that might be missing. Over here to the right, this is one thing that I think is a pretty valuable tool. You can get them, I think, for about $5 unless that price has changed very recently. CAST puts out something called an AT consideration wheel. You can see here it's outlining seating and positioning, vision, hearing, recreation, mobility, all of these areas. If you flip it over, it has more of the academic areas, and it lists some suggestions of types of tools. So that can really help get the juices flowing if a team has an idea of where they're going with a student's needs. So when we look at what comes for a positive outcome with adoption, earlier we looked at the student, family, and staff, as well as the support that we give someone in their technology. So our student, we know that can be affected by their age, their disability, maybe the severity of their difficulties in accessing the environment, or even their motivation. And we know those can all come back and affect each other. Secondly, that family expectations and background. This is heavily going to be influenced by culture, by socioeconomic status, and just what the family believes their child can do. And once again, those things feed into each other very much, and it might be something that we see very overtly, or it might be something we're very familiar with, though it could also be something that we might not see until we start digging a little deeper as to why a tool might not be matched. The staff, how we present the tool, and how we acknowledge the tool's use. I think I mention this every time I present with this topic, that there are staff members who have said to me, oh, well, I feel like him using this technology is cheating. Okay, well, let's take math as an example. If a student is using a calculator because they have dyscalculia or they aren't able to do their math facts with the speed that would allow them to accomplish a test, I ask the math teacher, what are we testing when we're looking at the concept that you have going on now? Are we looking at, can the student pull language out of word problems? Are we looking at the student can set up a problem correctly? Or are we looking that the student can multiply single digits quickly in their mind? If the answer is multiplying single digits quickly in their mind, okay, a calculator might not be the best tool solely for that task because you want to measure where the student is to see if your interventions are working. However, if that's not your main task, replace that function so that the student is able to do those other tasks and not lose points simply because their disability is interacting with your assignment. So we really need to think about how we present this to our students and to our teachers. Then also we have to think about the support that is given. We can't just put a tool in front of a student, but it also can't just be one person, something that we see repeatedly as we go through these different pieces of what leads to adoption. One thing I really like to emphasize to teams is there is a difference between consideration versus assessment and evaluation. For me, when I am doing consideration, we have all the information we need. If I pull out that student's IEP, I get a clear picture of them. I get a good picture of their present levels of functioning. I have a good idea of what their goals are, what their strengths are, what are their areas of need, as well as how they've been progressing with services. So all of that information can allow me to write up a student profile. It can allow me to find what tasks are difficult. It can allow me to match features. If I'm missing some of that information, that is where evaluation comes in. So with assistive technology consideration, this can be done ideally with some conversations before, but it can be done relatively quickly with a group who knows the student, knows tools, and knows the features. If we are assessing or evaluating, it's because we've missed something. And it's not necessarily always an assistive technology evaluation that gets us that information. It could be that we need information from the physical therapist about the student's seating or positioning before we can make a decision about assistive technology. So it's not always an AT eval. And I will say that even though we have a lot of consideration models, when we look at evaluating for the very specific things that assistive technology might help with, there are some things out there. I do list some of these assessments that are mentioned as far as assessments for assistive technology in here. They are also on the resource sheet that is with the materials for this presentation. Though I will say these are just a handful of examples, and they don't necessarily work in the same way that a standardized test might, where you sit down and select A, B, C, or D. Everything from the protocol for accommodations and reading is really comparing how a student does using a technology versus not using a technology. It's really a comparison. Things such as the SIFTs are looking more at what questions you might direct somebody to ask. The QUEST is a way to see user satisfaction. It might be something to do with a student who maybe has abandoned technology, or a student who you're kind of wondering where they're feeling with their current assistive technology. The FEAT also gives you some direction in what questions to ask, though these aren't necessarily something that you need to pull out to consider, assess, or evaluate. They're just a few directions that you can go in. Again, I just picked these out as a handful. There are many examples out there and many resources available, which is the great thing about assistive technology. When I've used the term feature matching a few times, and that's really where we want to get all the student information we can about their weaknesses or strengths, as well as their different needs. So I know that we have a lot of a push to write a very positive IEP, though we still need to identify what areas a student is struggling with. My most common issue with looking at an IEP, if it's a student I'm not familiar with, is I can read through that present level of function and I know that this is a great kid with a nice smile. He makes friends easily. He's respectful to adults, but it's, hey, I came to talk to this kid about math. What's going on with the math? So we need to know what those difficulties or weaknesses are in order to be able to accommodate them. It's also good to know what instructional technology is present because it differs very much from school to school, and instructional technology, just like assistive technology, is always updated, always changing. So I want to know, does the student have a program already that either has built-in features that the student might be using, or are those features maybe available so the student can try something that's universally known throughout the building, as well as maybe something a little more specialized? Moving on, what accommodations does the student have? There are some accommodations such as a scribe or a human reader that really lend themselves to matching with assistive technology. And what modifications does the student receive? All of these things considered can give us some features that we can try to match up with tools. So they're great places to look. There are models for feature matching. I put some of my favorites over here. The GPAT comes from the Georgia Project of Assistive Technology. It's set up very much like a worksheet where you can pick out what the task is a student has difficulty with. You can use a resource guide paired with that to get ideas of what tools are in the classroom, as well as what tools you might want to try, as well as just any other ideas the team might be able to brainstorm. The SET framework is a very popular one. You look at the student, their environment, the tasks that they need to accomplish, and the tools. The WADI or ASNAT is from the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative. If you print all of it out, you're going to have about 100 pages, but it gives very detailed step-by-step and directions, so you can truly get in if the team does not have the knowledge for consideration and use it as a learning process as you go through. But really, there's 2 pages there that can totally help you out if the team is ready to move to the next level. And then task demand analysis is one that might seem complex on the front end, but once you understand that every task a student does puts demands on the student, you can move on and feature match a little bit more effectively. I did put a link to some resource guides that have been made by the state of Illinois that do go back and talk about the demands of different tasks on a student and how you can feature match with those. Every activity gives a demand to the user. Just thinking about it, if I'm looking at a math problem, communication, I have to be able to understand the language in a word problem. Cognitive, I have to be able to organize my problem. Physical, I might have to be able to hold my pen and write on the page. Sensory, I need to be able to hear the teacher. I need to be able to see what's on my page. Affective, I need to care. There's not really a lot of assistive technology for that, as well as attentional, being able to stay on task. So is there AT that can fit with those different features to help a student? It's a very quick explanation of task demands, but it can be a very effective way to find what about that specific task is difficult. So here we are at our bonus activity. I have included some handouts with those different consideration models because it really is something that you need to walk through with a student in mind. So when you look at these handouts, take a look at one model that you have not used before, or it could be something that you have used and just haven't looked at through this lens, and answer some of these questions for yourself. What are your thoughts about it? Does it ask the questions that you would logically ask? Is this something that even after reading through it, you're still thinking, okay, I don't 100% synthesize with this, and maybe I need to learn a little bit more about consideration? And is this something that you're going to use in the future? This is really important because team members who are doing assistive technology consideration, pretty much anyone at the IEP table is completely capable of doing a great AT consideration, as long as they have the knowledge of the student, the knowledge of the tools, and some of this knowledge of process. So I hope to empower you a little bit with that, and I really encourage, even though this says bonus, to really take some time and work through this activity. And that ends our section on consideration.
Thank you for watching. For more information on the ATP education program, please visit our website at atp.nebraska.gov/education or email us at atp.education@nebraska.gov.